Spend my days in a haze, floating around in the Mare. Nights under the bright lights let me yawn on.
My grandmother had one of those old furniture consoles with the flip top, so it had the built-in stereo and the speakers were embedded. And she had a collection of old 45s, mostly 60s soul music. Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, Aretha Franklin. So that was probably my first exposure to physical copies of music, was like playing with that device, that turntable, and then those songs. A lot of Phil Spector stuff, you know, the Ronettes, and then my grandfather was a big Marty Robbins, Merle Haggard guy. My other grandfather just only listened to bluegrass, you know, Bill Monroe and Ralph Stanley, stuff like that. So what was my first album I ever owned? Probably the Monkees. So there was a TV show that used to run reruns on a network in the States, and when I was very young, you know, 6, 7 years old, so those records were the first records I ever bought. I had and now looking back, I realize that was all the Wrecking Crew and Harry Nilsson and Neil Diamond writing all those songs. So it was a pretty good musical forming education in terms of like melody and structure. And then I had older cousins and older kids down the street. When I was 3rd or 4th grade, they were like, here's Led Zeppelin and Cream and all, you know, from that, and then it just never ruined my life. I think I responded to the electric guitar first. You know, my dad took me to a Van Halen concert when I was in 4th grade, and that, you know, pretty impactful. And then it's just, you know, through high school, it was, you know, you hear Eric Clapton's song, and then you hear the Beano record, and you want to know who Freddie King is, and then you want to know who Roy Buchanan and Roy Gallagher, and it just never, it was always like, okay, we find a guitar player that really fascinates or inspires you, and you want to know like who they listen to, which back then it was harder. There was no YouTube. You had to go to the record store, and the information wasn't readily available. I used to read a lot of those. In the States, they have these guitar magazines, like with the tablature and the interviews. So that's where I would mine a lot of information that would lead to discovering other things. I was a young kid. I mean, it was a hobby, but it was definitely a passionate reaction. I remember being pretty obsessed, you know, far younger than, you know, probably should have been, to the point I didn't really want to. I knew in 5th grade like what I wanted to do, but you know, I've said this a lot. Where I grew up, like a lot of people play music, but it's never like you don't think that, you know, it's what you do after work in Kentucky. So I never had any ambitions of running off after high school and joining a band in a big city or something like that. I just didn't, you know, wasn't in my worldview at the time.
I've lost friends.
When I moved to Nashville, I had this kind of distinctly carved out 5-record arc that I wanted to make 5 sort of conceptual country records that served. This is so heady, and at this point, but yeah, so that was done. It was over. I finished that last record, and I always said, and I got to this point where I don't know, like I kind of wanted my name back for myself. I felt like my identity had just become a brand, you know. And to be at airports or something, and you hear somebody say your name, and you turn around and you realize like you've never met this person, and it's be a pleasant encounter, but all the same, I was just, I don't know. So and then I realized I was always a big fan of the Derek and the Dominos record, and I thought that was a really neat concept that he hid behind a character to make a very vulnerable rock and roll record of love songs. And I don't know if he would have done it with his name on it. The name came from when I was in my early 20s. I'd gotten out of the Navy and moved back to this town in Kentucky, and there was a bartender, a guy Dave, who, you know, wore like a black trench coat and just stood outside like flipping a Zippo all the time. And when I'd walk in every day, he would be like, "Johnny Blue Skies." And to this day, I have no idea why. So when I did an anime film for a rock and roll record in Japan, it was I put it under Johnny Blue Skies Productions. And then on the Sailor's Guide to Earth record, there was a little nod to, it was a very nautical themed album, so the inside we had this old sort of 16th century illustrated nautical map with the sea monsters and everything. I used to see those when I was a kid and think they were really cool. And I put on the map, there's a little island down in the corner, and it's like this peg-leg pirate with my face. It just says, you know, in this territory, like, beware of the dread pirate Johnny Blue Skies. So when I needed a name, that just seemed like a pretty obvious choice. Mostly, to answer your question, because the paperwork was already done. I owned the name. I tried to make a cohesive record, but there's certainly not like an arcing, underlining, definitive narrative. It's just a collection of songs.
Don't look too strange.
Some of those were definitely, a couple of them were, you know, conceptual. One of them was definitely a story front to beginning, and a lot of them were just songs. I mean, I write all the time, constantly, but you know, to make a record, I'm not interested in really making singles, which is pretty indicative of my intelligence level because, you know, praying to a dead business model making albums, but just a collection of songs that cohesively feel like they were from the same moment or the same headspace, or they occupy a similar wheelhouse, you know. So Metamodern was really incorporating elements of music from country music from 50s all the way through 60s psychedelia, and then we even experimented with like tape manipulation, trying to mimic like what you might hear a dubstep artist do with computers, but we were using analog equipment and instrumentation and backmasking and just getting weird. Because honestly, I only did that because I had a baby on the way and my career hadn't really taken off yet. So I thought that record would be the last time I ever got to record music until I had to go get a real job. So there were no rules, nothing mattered. And I think that's why that album got made the way it did. And that's weirdly the one that launched my career, so. This one, I'd kind of gotten all the left and right turns out of my system. And with this one, I just had, you know, I was living mostly in Europe, Southeast Asia for the last couple of years and writing all the time. And I had this collection of songs I'd written in Paris. Thought I was done touring. I had a really bad vocal injury a few years ago and hit kind of a funk, a pretty low period because of that, and just decided to travel to kind of fight depression. And so I wrote all these songs and then had some pretty impactful things that happened in my personal life, and lost a lot of people and friends that were dear to me. And then one person in particular, last year when I was in Paris, that was very like important in my life. At one point, I found out she'd killed herself. So I just decided, you know what, I gotta like get all this stuff on tape and record it. So we made the record, but with this record, it was really very simple, and I wanted the music to be like pure, without any gimmicks or like over-the-top production. So it was myself and just 3 other very good studio musicians. Less is totally more, and I was listening to it, a lot of the music I was listening to at the time was like mid and late 70s kind of landscape rock records where they'd really mastered analog recording by that point. You know, I think those are the best sounding albums ever made from that period of time. Yeah, like Late for the Sky, Jackson Browne, some of that Bee Gees stuff, Main Course. Those records like sound incredible. Jerry Rafferty, you know, I reached like what my buddy called like my grown-ass man music phase, where I just wanted to like, I didn't need to be assaulted anymore. I just wanted to like fall in and absorb. So I was listening to a lot of more like warmer, realized recordings. So with this one, we just kept everything very minimum input, clean signal path, and didn't use a lot of, you know, tricks and trash. In terms of musical style, it's a little all over the place, but I feel like it's the most me album I've ever made. And then even with like, when I just put all the electric guitars and things down on the record, there were no pedals, no effects. It was just, you know, Les Paul and an old Fender Princeton. And we were at Abbey Road And that was the only thing in the room was the guitar amp. So I just wanted, you know, a really pure tone, like nothing in the way. Love story with Paris, love story with, you know, various women, stages of my life, stories about other people's relationships, struggles and fault, and kind of like things I'd witnessed or observed from other people growing up. Songs about people I knew 25 years ago. And then also just pulled a lot of metaphors from like literature or books I've read. You know, for this one there was a lot, the Odyssey was a big influence on me when I was in the Navy. When I was younger, I always liked nautical imagery and the story, like the idea of mental illness as a metaphor for like the temptations of life, sort of like Odysseus sailing by the rock, you know. And then, yeah, I just had been in Paris walking around aimlessly and wanted to kind of, I guess, musically make something that felt a little more timeless. I honestly didn't really think about this one too much. In the past, I've always had like clear-cut, almost like a bulletin roadmap before you go in, because you like to record really fast. But with this one, it's just, we had these songs, and my engineer was available, so I made a record. Also because there's something wrong with me, and if something works or is successful, I just feel like I don't deserve it, so I run from it. Or if people say like, well, this is great, we want more of this, my brain is like, no, you can't have it. I do this now. It's a fault.
When it seems like the whole world is against you.
Honestly, I never listened to much of Waylon until I met his son. And we have a similar baritone. People think I was intimidated. I wasn't. Like, if I sing bluegrass, my voice sounds different because you're pushing from the diaphragm in a different way. But country, certain about enunciations and, well, honestly, the first record I made, I sounded like Waylon because I think the producer was trying to make me sound like Waylon. So a lot of the songs were put in keys where my voice would sit in that register as much as possible. And I feel like I've been running from that record ever since. I mean, Waylon's great, but I've probably listened to Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard way more. But the records those guys make, I think, were pretty groundbreaking in terms of production and sonics, because they were trying to make rock and roll records. Well, Willie's a great example. You know, he was in Nashville for a long time, and they just didn't know what to do with him. They didn't understand the esoterics of the art that he had inside of him, and his career didn't even start until he retired. You know, he moved back to Austin in his 40s, and then it doesn't matter what I do now, I'm retired, I've got publishing on these classics, so he started writing all these heady country concept records. And they got canceled, or, you know, he got not canceled, but those 3 classic records we all love so much now got him dropped from Atlantic Records, you know, like nobody bought them. And it wasn't until years later that people caught up to what he was doing. And that you have to, it's not about charts or sales, or you can never like approach this endeavor as like, is this gonna, one, make me successful, and how do I stay successful? And if I do a duet with all these people in these 8 million different streams of music to gain relevance and visibility, it's just never been something I was interested in because of the guys you're talking about. 2017, I was pretty burnt out from the road. Weirdly I don't know why, we got this call. I wanted to go audition for a TV show. When I was in LA, I had a day off, and I was like, why not? This seems interesting. So I went and did it. Didn't get the job, but that audition led to, I guess, some people seeing the audition, and it led to a few other jobs. And at the time, I wasn't touring. And then COVID happened, so I'm sitting on my butt at home for a year and a half and got some jobs, and was like, why not? And then once I ruptured my vocal cord, I had another job offer, and I took it. But I feel like it's a great way to kill some time, but it's just not, it's not something I feel the need to actively pursue. I'm a musician, and I didn't find it all that creatively rewarding or gratifying, to be honest. But I love movies, I love film. So I guess to be embedded in that process was a bit of a letdown. Because you don't really, it's nice to be a contributing member of something so large when there's 200 people making this thing, but I just realized like I should just stick to what I love and know.
Now, Henry, what I need is someone who can do a job. Someone who can take a proposition and do an old man in his blanket. And I just don't want any man.
That was a weird day, for sure. That was the whole thing, even like getting that job. I was sitting at home during COVID and got a call to audition for the movie. I was like, oh, okay. Marty wanted some Southerners, apparently. So I did this audition with this really nice woman, Ellen, and I'd never done a Zoom call in my life, much less, I don't know how to audition for a damn movie. And we did this scene one time, and I didn't even know what I was doing. So like I'm pretending like I'm talking to somebody over here, and she just goes, hold on, stop. She goes, what are you looking at? And I was like, oh, well, this went great. We did it one time, never heard from anybody for 5 months, and then I get a phone call saying, like, Marty says you're the guy. I was like, okay. So ended up out in Oklahoma for 6 months, and that day in particular was the first day of filming of the entire movie. That was the first scene that got shot, and we did a rehearsal the day before, and obviously I was nervous. And there's like Bob De Niro and Leo and Martin Scorsese, and like everybody there on the crew was like total A-game, best in the business, and I'm just like, why am I here? Honestly, De Niro was so cool and down to earth and grounded, and so everybody was really just easy that all that dissipated in about 5 minutes, and then you're just pretending to be a cowboy, I love writing songs. I mean, I write all the time, and I have written some things, but I just don't know if I'd ever like get the nerve to put that stuff out in the world. A lot of poetry, and I've written some stories. But songs I like music. You can tell stories in 3 minutes. But at this point, I feel like I'm probably more of a writer, because even when I write songs now, I'm not sitting down with a guitar. I'm writing, for lack of a better word, prose, I guess, or just getting things out in motion, and later on, usually in the studio, this drives Ferg crazy. I can just sit down, kind of internally get the meter and the flow of the lines on the page, so you know like where the stanza and the breaks are, and then from there it's just like framing it with chords, like putting the music, deciding how to musically frame and enhance the emotion of whatever those words are. So most of the time, at least half the record, I'm writing while I'm sitting in the studio. Which is always, I feel like it takes a lot of pressure off, because it really becomes a true like in the moment process. But yeah, I write all the time. In terms of all the like heroes that I've met, I think the most like jaw-dropping, I went to Albert Hall last year and watched Jeff Beck play and got to meet him backstage, and then sadly he passed away very shortly after, but he was always like a real hero to me. So like seeing that live and like what he could command from a guitar, like nobody else can replicate what he was doing with that thing. It was so unique. Roy Buchanan was probably another guitar player like that for me. Danny Gatton, guys like that. Yeah.
Sit down, baby. I got some things that you need to